Hello, everybody. My name is Ryan Sagar with the Knight Center for Journalism in the Americas. Hopefully, some of you will be joining us on this Google Hangout live. If you don't get us live, of course, you'll be able to see this in the course shell at journalismcourses.org. We should be live right now on Facebook. I'm just going to double check. I'm joining, of course, from the University of Texas and Bill Gentile, I believe, right now. Where are you, Bill?
I'm at home in Washington, D.C., where I've been living for the past almost 20 years.
Okay, I'm just going to make sure that we've got this live. We've got a few people watching. Terrific. So, of course, you guys, this is for the course video production with Bill Gentile. I'm going to show you a little something from my camera before we get started. Bill Gentile is, of course, a professor at American University, where he is right now, in Washington, D.C. And share with some on my screen really quick. Really quickly, I just want to say this, of course, is brought by the Knight Center for Journalism in the Americas. Obviously, this is, of course, video production for journalists in the digital age. This is a course that runs from October 22nd to November 25th. So a couple things that I want to share with you guys. This is where we have all our courses and information about upcoming courses. We have 4 courses going on, 2 in Spanish, 1 in Portuguese, and of course this course in English. One thing I want to point you guys to before Bill and I get started here is also on journalismcourses.org, we have this wonderful resource right here, which is previous course content. And here you'll be able to access the courses that we've recently been running and future courses. Of course, we just did a course in podcasting. We did a course in our programming language, data visualization with Alberto Cairo. So I just wanted to share that wonderful resource. This course, of course, will be available here at the course end date. But anyhow, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Bill. And Bill's going to kind of tell us a little bit about exactly what we're going to be doing today with this Google Hangout. If you guys have questions, go ahead. Please just, you can make little messages on here, and we'll share those questions with Bill. But Bill, without further ado, let's talk about what we're going to be doing today.
Yeah, I wanted to share with you all, we're coming toward the end of this course now. We got to, this week and next week, and we're done on the 25th, I believe. And I wanted to share with you my latest project, and it's the pilot episode of a series of documentary films about freelance foreign correspondence. As many of you probably know, there have been, in the last couple of decades, there's been a real severe cutback by mainstream media on bureaus of overseas and foreign correspondents working at the bureau. And I'm getting feedback now. Ryan, I don't know why I'm getting feedback now. But what I'm trying to do is, I'm trying to launch this series. As a matter of fact, tomorrow at the Open Club in New York City, we're having a screening of this pilot episode, which myself and a graduate student produced in Mexico last year. Instead of going on spring break to Palm Beach and Florida, we went to Mexico and hung out along the border. Went to Mexico City, and we went into the southern state of Guerrero to follow some freelance foreign correspondents who are stepping into the void created by mainstream media. Cutting back bureaus and slashing their staff of foreign correspondents, supposedly because it's too expensive. That's a different subject, but it's important you understand some of the background for this piece and the series that we're trying to do. So the pilot episode we shot last year in Mexico. Our idea is to go to probably Thailand or Turkey next. After that, maybe Lebanon, Brazil, and because the news around the world changes continuously, and the people who change who cover these countries and these regions, because they change. I mean, it can be an endless series of documentary films about how news and information arrives, to us and in our newspapers, at our websites, on our television screens, on our computer screens. So there are so many, points of lessons here in this episode. How just myself and a student worked, the equipment that we brought with us, and just as importantly, the equipment that we did not bring with us to Mexico. How we built, the structure of this piece. We spent time with more than half a dozen freelance foreign correspondents running around Mexico, and you'll see how we blend these dramatic arcs, which we've been talking about for the past couple of weeks. How we blend all of these things and how we build the structure of these pieces to engage an audience, both I think intellectually and emotionally, and take them from the beginning of a story to the middle and all the way to the end of the story. In this case, our story lasts 54 minutes and 42 seconds, I believe. But we're not going to see the whole thing. What I'd like you to see is how we weave, and you've seen this before in the other pieces you've seen so far in this course, how we weave one character, the main character, from the beginning through the middle of the piece and all the way to the end of the piece. So, when Ryan starts this thing, we'll let, and we're talking about Yoan Grillo is the correspondent's name. He's a Brit. And he works, he does a lot of freelancing for the New York Times and for Time Magazine. So we'll start with him, and when his section in the beginning ends, we can like fast forward through some of the other characters and the other pieces that make this this documentary whole. We'll pick up Yoan in the middle of the piece, and we'll fast forward till the end of the piece when he finally and I check out. Of the film altogether. One thing that you're going to see here that you haven't seen so far is you'll see me in front of the camera, which I never ever do. You've heard me before in other pieces, for example, in the Afghanistan, the Forgotten War piece that we've seen and we've commented a lot on. And we discussed this whole idea of participatory observation. Our job is to observe and document, but not to participate. But to get people, our characters, to tell their stories, we have to participate to a certain degree, i.e. asking them questions. You saw a lot of informal questions that I posed the Marines in the Afghanistan piece, and I asked them, what are you doing? What did you just do? What are you going to do now? That's the way to engage our characters and get them to tell you, the audience, their story. So Ryan, whenever you're ready, we'll start to roll the this other piece. It's called it's the Freelancers with Bill Gentile. It's a pilot episode for that series, and let's see Yoan Grillo.
Okay, so we're going to show the first 5 minutes of this clip, Bill. Just basically before I show this clip, maybe you can tell us. We've talked a little bit about in the course about the importance of kind of hooking the audience. What was the decision process in actually going with this? I know there's the definition of freelancers to start out the clip, but what are we going to see, and what was the decision to use that for the first part of the film?
When you're out in the field, it's a very good question, Ryan, and thanks for asking it. When you're out on the field, at least when I'm out on the field, I'm always, checking out what we're doing, what I'm generating, the kind of media, the kind of pictures, the kind of sound that I'm gathering. And again, this was only me and my graduate student, my graduate assistant. He's graduated now, and he's working as a freelancer, of all things, in the Washington, D.C. and Maryland area. He's from Maryland, from Baltimore, actually. And, as I'm out on the field generating this raw material with which I'm going to build the story, I'm always thinking, where am I going to put this? Where is it going to be? Where am I going to put this? So we ended up with Yoan Grillo on the border, the Mexican border with the United States, in Nogales, which is right across the river from Nogales, Arizona, and we hooked up with a Mexican stringer, and also a freelancer, and we went with with this stringer in these underground water drainage tunnels. I guess Nogales is built kind of in kind of a valley, and when it rains hard there, they get a lot of rain running through the city. So to avoid having the city, flood, they have these huge drainage tunnels built underneath the city, and they also run along the border. So what happens is, when drug runners or human being runners want to move goods or people from Mexico to the United States, they take advantage of these underground tunnels, dig through them, and they make connecting tunnels, between the two countries. So, our stringer, our fixer, rather, Milton, a Mexican guy who is a journalist, who is a very, very well-established guy. He writes for a Mexican magazine. He's from Nogales. He was born and raised there. Knows a lot of people. Kind of the guy you want to be your fixer. Knows the language, of course. Knows the culture. Knows the police. He set up a visit, a trip with us, accompanied by the Mexican police. And these tunnels, as I say in my narration, they're not a place you want to go to without a police escort and a lot of guns. So, we spent, I don't know, a couple of hours walking through these tunnels and talking and checking out, the auxiliary tunnels that the traffickers had built connecting the two countries. And when Matt and I, my student and I, stepped out of, these tunnels into, daylight again, I turned to him and I think I said, we just filmed the opening sequence of the documentary, because in all the films that I produce, in all the films that I tried, in all the stories that I try to tell, I try to put the most powerful the images that we have at the beginning of the film. Studies will show you that, you've got like somewhere between 8 seconds and 14 seconds to really hook into an audience, either intellectually or emotionally. And you use that engagement that you established at the beginning of the film to pull them, lure them through to the end of the film, whether it's 5 minutes long or an hour long. You hook them at the beginning and you pull them all the way through to the end. If you lose them somewhere along the way, it's really hard, if not impossible, to get them back. So when Matt and I got out of these tunnels, it was this is the most powerful thing we've shot to date. So that's why we started with this, and it was pertinent also. You have to consider the context within which you're doing these videos or these films, and this is a time when the President of the United States is railing against immigration, people coming north from Central America and Mexico, crossing the Mexican border with the United States. So it's contemporary, it was powerful, it's pertinent, it's important to all Americans. I mean, my parents were born in Italy. They immigrated to this country in the 1930s. So we're all immigrants to a certain degree. So, there's a common ground here for just about anybody who's watching this film.
All right.
For all of those reasons and more, we're using this material to open the film with.
All right. Well, let's. I'm excited. So let's watch the first kind of 5 minutes of the film. So I'm going to put it on screen share right now, and let's do this.
Great.
Okay. So let me know if you see any issues. So we've got. Here we go. Let me chime in, Bill, if you hear anything unusual sound. But we are going to start from 0, and here we go.
It's a long, dark walk under the streets of Nogales, Mexico. These drainage tunnels prevent seasonal rains from flooding the streets above. They also allow human and drug traffickers underground access from Mexico into the United States. It's not the kind of place you want to go for an afternoon stroll, not without a police escort and lots of guns.
Hold on, Bill. I'm going to start a little bit from the beginning. I saw that I was not screen shaving, so we're going to start right here.
It's a long, dark walk under the streets of Nogales, Mexico. These drainage tunnels prevent seasonal rains from flooding the streets above. They also allow human and drug traffickers underground access from Mexico into the United States. It's not the kind of place you want to go for an afternoon stroll. Not without a police escort and lots of guns.
¿Cuánto, desde este punto hasta el otro lado, cuánto tiempo es? ¿Cuánto distancia es?
Pues yo creo que casi la pared.
Okay, so this is pretty amazing here. You got this. So this is the Comandante showing us. This is another tunnel which has been found and filled in with concrete. Now, actually, this line is almost the border into the United States. Like right through here is the United States. We're right up on the border here, underground. So this, they make this tunnel from here and just take drugs into the United States. Have someone go down that side. Now this concrete, you can see, was like poured in by the Border Patrol. The BP there stands for Border Patrol. They recognize the Border Patrol found this. So they poured in concrete from the United States side, just poured it down, and it ended up, filled up here.
And they had to have some cooperation here from the Mexican authorities, I think, because apparently they put a piece of something here to block this concrete, but it came out to stop it. So there's coordination between the two countries. Yon Grillo is a freelance journalist working for outlets including the New York Times and Time magazine. He's not staff. Freelance means he proposes stories to media outlets and they either buy his work or not. Or an outlet contacts him to request his coverage on some issue or event. Grillo is one member of a new generation of freelance journalists increasingly filling the void left by mainstream media retreating from news coverage abroad. As corporate media close bureaus and cut staff around the world, it's freelancers who take their place.
Okay, so this is a drainage tunnel from the United States that goes into Mexico. Now the issue is you have in this area one city which crosses the border. However, drug smugglers would use these to smuggle drugs into the United States. It smells pretty funky down here right now. You start getting into this area, which is also used for sewage.
Grillo has covered drug trafficking in Mexico for 15 years, but even he didn't fully understand the impact of this border on the lives of people living in its shadow. We'll follow him as he reveals those hidden stories on both sides of this frontier.
Well, you can see a pretty long tunnel going right, which is right to the United States. So you can see this is something else, and you can see kind of holes in there. You can see this is something else, which will be a way to potentially move drugs.
Photojournalist Patrick Tombola is based in Venice, Italy. He's making photos which he'll try to sell to the New York Times. Like Grillo, Tombola is a dedicated, determined, and tech-savvy professional putting everything on the line to live life his way. His last job with Grillo was this story on El Salvador for Time magazine.
You've got two layers of gates, and you've got a lighted area, and you've got obviously some various sensors and equipment here.
Grillo and Tombola are here to bring us the information we need to make crucial decisions about our lives and the world we live in. It's important to understand who these journalists are and how they work, the places they take us, and the people we meet.
This is some kind of defenses, so you couldn't just drill up from here into the United States.
United States begins there. En esa línea aquí.
All right, we're going to stop right there, Bill, and come back to you before we get to our next clip.
Okay.
So first of all, give us a little bit of talk a little bit about kind of the characters you're using in this clip and why you chose to go with these characters. You've got the freelance journalist, which is I didn't catch his name, but maybe you can talk a little bit about the characters and why you chose them for the film.
Sure. We selected, Mexico is where I started out being a freelance foreign correspondent in 1977. I moved to Mexico right after my coursework here in the United States, and so I went to Mexico. I was supposed to be there for like only 10 weeks and doing a brief internship, coming back to the States, writing a paper about it, and then looking for a job, looking for a job. Well, I stayed at the English language paper where I was working for a year, and as I went into my second year out of 4 in Mexico, I began working for United Press International, a wire service, a global service, much like the Associated Press or Reuters is today. So that's where I started out being a journalist and being, more specifically a foreign correspondent. So I knew a lot of the people on the ground before I went down there. My pre-production for this was contacting the few people who were still around and who were still, practicing the craft, and finding out who were the key players in Mexico. Mexico is and as you probably know, journalists move around in packs, and we move from hub to hub, covering regions of the world. And Mexico is today, as it was when I first went there in 1977, it was a hub for not just Mexico, but because of the airline communications, the telecommunications, the cultural connections, the economic connections, the political connections, we covered all of Mexico, Central and the Caribbean. That's the area. So when I went down to Mexico again last year, I knew a couple of the people who were freelance. One of them is he's written 2 terrific books about drug trafficking in Mexico and in the Western Hemisphere. He's worked on interviews. He's done, just a lot of different. He's a multi-talented guy. And when you work with guys, you have tremendous influence on what everybody else is doing in the region that you're covering. The New York Times is the most respected of any media organization in this country. So a lot of times you'll have, especially television networks, they'll be following the lead of the New York Times. So we chose as our key character, partly because of his role and his success in being a freelance foreign correspondent, but also because he's, and I think I said this in one of my modules. When you select your characters, they have to pass 3 tests. One of them is, do they want to be a character in your film? Some people don't want to, and that's totally understandable. Especially like Mexico. A lot of people, want to do their work very quietly on the sidelines, as opposed to be in the headlines, because it's a very dangerous place to work, and you can be targeted for your work in Mexico. Since the year 2000, as a matter of fact, I think about 100 journalists in Mexico have been killed. 25 other have been are missing and are presumed dead. Sadly, all of these journalists are Mexican. Is foreigner. But back to the do the characters know the characters in the film? Do they have good stories to tell? Are they articulate in telling those stories? Those are the 3 things that I use to determine who's going to be the character in the film. And he owns half the more. He wanted to be in the film. He has a great story. The stories that he's covered. Not only that, 4 of his friends in Great Britain died of drug overdoses. So he's familiar with a lot of the territory he covered, and he was extremely articulate in telling the story of the drug trafficking, but also a broader story of what is Mexico and Mexicans about. So that's why we chose Yon, and the other folks who are in the documentary. There are just over half a dozen characters. Yon is the main one, but there are other characters as well. And as a matter of fact, there were at least 2 characters who declined to be in the film precisely because they thought it might be too dangerous for them. So, Mexico has changed, a lot since I moved there in 1977. It's no longer this, peaceful kind of laid-back place. It's a very, very dangerous place where the drug cartels have insinuated themselves in just about every facet of life in Mexico. It's really quite bad. There are practical issues that I want to discuss too here. When you go into a place like Mexico, and this is, this was, I think, a really quick education for my graduate student, Matt. You know, you don't want to have a lot of stuff with you. You don't want to have a big, you know, camera. I have access to all the equipment that American University has at its disposal. You know, cameras that are worth thousands of dollars, big flashy pieces of equipment. But, you know, I didn't want to take all of this stuff. I wanted to cut down as much as we could and go as light as we could, so that we would not, you know, attract a lot of attention, so that we would not attract people who would take stuff from us, so that we could, you know, fly really, really low on the radar and, you know, just get into the country and get out. We spent only 10 days there, and you know, we produced this piece that I think turned out very, very well. I'm very, very happy with that. It's a 1-hour piece. So we took Matt had a mirrorless Sony camera, it's an HD SLR. And for sound, you know, we had the option of taking this big sound box that Matt would hang from his, you know, from his shoulder and have, you know, dials and lights on it. We passed on that and took, you know, he has a directional mic on his little camera, and we took a couple of these little Zoom recorders that are about this big. You could tuck into your pocket, tuck into your vest pocket. It has a little lavalier microphone. You put that on. I wore one at all times, and we put the other one on whatever character we were following. In this case, we were following Jon Grillo. We put the microphone on him. So we came back with 3, you know, very, very clean channels of sound that we mixed to get, you know, the best sound that we could as a result of those three separate channels. And I'll tell you, you know, a lot of viewers, audiences in general, they'll be okay with, you know, if the picture is not, you know, perfectly well framed, or if it's a little bit out of focus, or something's, you know, kind of off in it. But they won't. They'll forgive that, but they won't forgive bad sound. So, you know, sound is really critical, and you have to make sure you're carrying the proper gear to get the proper sound. Matt, as I say, had his little camera, and I had this thing, you know, an iPhone. It's an iPhone 6, and there are a couple of sequences that you'll see in the film that I shot with this because Matt wasn't around, or I actually shot him in the scene, or he, you know, or he wasn't able to shoot. I shot it with this, and it's, you know, it's high resolution, and it looks perfectly fine. Particularly the nighttime shot, you know, where I do not use a zoom, because that's one of the things you don't want to do with these cell phones. You don't want to use a zoom because it's a digital zoom as opposed to an optical zoom, and the image just generally falls apart, especially at night.
So Bill, we're going to look here in a second. We're going to look at the clip that was that starts at 15 minutes. And so can you just give us a quick little introduction of maybe this clip, or maybe you want to talk after we actually watch the clip, and tell us why, you know, what's the dramatic arc that's going on, the characters that we're talking about.
Okay, yeah, you know what? Let's do it after we see it, because all
right, let's do it.
It'll be easier for me.
All right, let me just go to my screen sharing. Okay, we're going to head to the 15-minute mark. So we're going to
well supported by their employers. I don't know.
This one, and
driven by a deep sense of purpose. If there's a single thread that binds or defines them all, it's the need to make a difference. Back in Nogales with Jon Grillo and his fixer Milton Martinez, we explore the border fence with the United States. Things get a bit sketchy here, especially at night.
Aquí hay muchos reporteros que hacen la nota roja.
Sí, preferentemente hacen nota roja, ¿no?
Sí. Y sí sigue mucho ejecutado aquí en la ciudad.
Sí, aquí en la ciudad nunca ha parado las ejecuciones. Es algo extraño. En la ciudad they have those lights over here.
We pulled up to a place along the border where U.S. officials, that's the United States on the other side of this fence, have set up a powerful light. Milton says this area of the border is a hot zone for trafficking drugs and people. What are these lights for, Jon?
This is lights from the US side of the border to show people, so you can see clearly if someone's crossing, if someone climbs over the fence or tries to drill a hole and run into the United States, then people can see it easily. You've got lights showing, so you can't hide under cover of darkness.
That you said before, this is the way the U.S. government chose its power to. Because it used to be a very quiet city. You remember, it used to be one city. It was a brotherhood.
Jon spots a group of men on our side of the border. They're watching us. They don't look friendly. We're careful not to point the camera in their direction.
So what we came across here, and there's a bunch of vehicles, two big trucks, one car right behind where the camera is, and some guys looked like they were trying to check out getting over the fence. They looked like they might have some merchandise, meaning drugs, in the cars. And as we stopped here, one of the guys wandered past, checking us out, seeing who we are. So they're probably just, okay, see we can probably recognize we're journalists, see we're talking to a camera. You know, this varies in different parts of the border, how they're going to react to you. In Nogales, it's more of a chilled area. They're less likely to be violent right away. Some other parts of Mexico, they could be more aggressive, a lot faster.
Milton is a classic example of what journalists call a fixer. He was born and raised here. He's a reporter for a Mexican magazine. His other job is making life easier and safer for people like Jon Grillo and me. Here, he advises on what to do as we're being watched.
In the Sicarius time, you don't respect anything.
What's fascinating to me and alarming to me is that everybody here, every Mexican here understands what's happening when three big vehicles like this pull up next to the fence, and everybody knows that all this is going on. You know, the drug trafficking, the jumping over the wall, the danger that exists from these dark forces, and they live with it every day. And it seems to be inescapable in some places of the country.
Well,
Is that a stretch?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean, you've got the force of an industry, the pull of money. So, you know, why are those guys a few meters from us right now? Why they're there? They're doing their job. Now, their job is trafficking drugs. But our economic forces, there's economic forces behind this.
Sure.
So, the White House carries out a survey every year, or a report every year called What Americans Spend on Illegal Drugs. Mm-hmm. And that report estimates that Americans spend $100 billion every year on marijuana, heroin, cocaine, and crystal meth. So when you have $100 billion of money, and a product on this side of the fence is worth so much, and just by going onto this side of the fence, that product increases in value massively. I mean, think about a kilo of cocaine. A kilo of cocaine in Colombia, they buy it for about $2,000. When they get it over on this side, it's worth about $30,000 for that kilo. So you're talking about, for every dollar you invest, you get $15 back. You know, it's a better business than most people are in. Right. So that's the force of money. So now we left there. Let's see what the guys are doing. They back out the trucks. They're still in the trucks.
Yeah, I think you may want to keep the camera down when we go by. Further down this street, Jon explores this abandoned house, apparently used as a safe house by smugglers of drugs and human beings.
So,
What is this, Jon?
so this is a house which has been seized by the Federal Attorney General's Office of Mexico.
Right.
And they seized this house, and this was a house which was seized because there was a tunnel going from this house under the border into the United States.
That's the United States right there.
That's the United States right there. So this is just a crossing, an urban crossing.
Grillo has written 2 highly acclaimed books on drug trafficking. Back in England, 4 of his friends died from drug use. So for him, this story is personal. And maybe that's why his work is so powerful.
In this case, it seems to be cleaned out pretty well.
He wasn't always a freelancer. He actually worked for a while for a global news service in Mexico, but he felt constrained. He wanted to cover the country his way, so he went back to freelancing. Deported from the United States back to Mexico for reasons he didn't specify, this young man said he makes more in 1 day of labor in the United States than he does in 1 week in Mexico. That's his wife on the other side of the fence in the U.S. state of Arizona. We followed Grillo to a shelter for migrants, mostly from Mexico, Central America, and the Caribbean. They were either on their way into the United States or were recently deported from the United States. Patrick Tombola is what many young freelancers aspire to be. A successful photo and video documentarian, he specializes in Latin America, the Middle East, and Europe. He's taken assignments from major newspapers and magazines around the world, sometimes at great personal risk.
And then just all of a sudden, they just said, bam, 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 bam. And he got two of the back on his back that killed him. And then even after he was lying down bleeding, the guy...
We crisscrossed the city gathering information. And with Milton's help, we interviewed the mayor of Nogales. Then we headed back to the hotel. So, Bill, go ahead and walk us through that 10-minute clip that we just saw, the characters that we saw in the clip, and yeah, just kind of explain kind of the dramatic arc of what we just saw.
Yeah, you know, this middle section here is an important link in the transition from the beginning of the film to the end of the film. And there are some really important points here, not just about journalism and making film, but also about the way we comport ourselves when we're out in the field. You know, one of my the most important things that I point out to students is that the people who are the most important in our craft are also the ones that too often are the least compensated and the most vulnerable of our craft. And I'm talking about people like Milton, you know, and freelancers in general, but particularly the local guys like Milton, who works at a Mexican magazine. He works as a fixer for guys like Yo and Grillo. You know, sometimes he works for international news outlets as a contributor. And you know, these guys, they don't have a lot of support. They don't have a lot of financial support. As I mentioned previously, in this discussion, Since the year 2000, 100 Mexican journalists have been killed. I mean, I think there are about a half a dozen that have been killed so far this year, maybe more than that. And there's never any reprisals for this. There's never any no one, there's never an arrest. There's never a trial. The level of impunity in Mexico, particularly when we're talking about killing journalists, is just extraordinary. As a matter of fact, the New York Times, the magazine, did a piece about the killing of journalists in Mexico, and the title of the piece was "It's Easy to Kill Journalists in Mexico." So these are the folks. Again, as I point out in this documentary, when the situation in wherever it is, a country in Latin America, a country in the Middle East, a country in Africa or Asia, whenever the situation on the ground gets really, really difficult, really hairy, really dangerous, people like me can go to the airport, whip out a passport, and go home. In my case, an American passport. But these folks, they can't go home because they already are home. A lot of them just can't escape. They're stuck there. So we have to do everything we can to protect these folks. And when they want to talk on an anonymous basis, be there our sources or our fixers or any of these locals, we have to be really, really careful not to endanger their lives even more than they are. I mean, it's not just journalists. It's environmental activists. It's labor union leaders. These people, live and die trying to figure out where that thin red line is, and whether they're crossing it day by day. And the problem is that the thin red line moves all the time, and people don't know exactly where it is. So a lot of it's just a guessing game. Aside from that, you saw, in terms of the structure of the piece, you saw in the technology we used in the piece, when we first went up to that fence separating the Mexico from the United States, there was a generator. You can hear a generator in the background. And we had, it was a little bit difficult, especially when I was kind of distant from our two characters, and the camera was, Matt's camera was. We had to find a balance between Zoom microphone that Yon was wearing, the Zoom microphone that I was wearing, and the directional mic on Matt's HDSLR. But we worked out, and I hope anyway, the sound there is understandable and not a distraction. The piece also serves to really, really drive home how dangerous a place Mexico can be. We didn't know who these guys were who pulled up at the border, and thank goodness we were at a place. Nogales, as Yon points out, is a fairly chilled place in comparison to other places along the border, which are not chilled, which are not relaxed. And the folks in Nogales who are doing whatever that may be illegal, they are less likely to turn violent, terribly quickly. So, we were lucky. Beyond that, lucky thought. At the migrant center that we went to, that we visited, Yon was able to talk to people from whom he got a real sense of how the reality along the border has changed and how deeply the narcos have infested and infected Mexican society. Nothing moves across. These are not guys, as he points out later, these are not people who just traffic drugs and human beings across the border, okay? These are people who are involved in, multi-million-dollar industries of stealing and selling petroleum. You were talking about billions of dollars there. These are people who, 10 years ago, the narcos would have to pay the mayors of small towns to keep the police off their backs, off the backs of, the narcos, so that they could do their business freely without getting in trouble. Now, the mayors in some of these towns have to pay the narcos 10% of their budget so that the mayors, can, number one, stay alive, and number two, be elected to office. In a lot of places, it's the narcos who decides which men or women are going to run for office and which ones are not. And they decide which ones are going to live in office and which ones are not. So Yon really, despite the fact that he's been reporting on the border for the past 15 years, he really was surprised at some of the things we found out that day speaking to those migrants, because they could tell them, they did tell them that a couple of years ago it was $2,000 to cross the border. We had to pay the coyotes. Now it's like $6,000. Why? Because they pay the coyotes have to pay the narcos. And nobody crosses the border. If you try to, you can get beat up or you can get killed trying to cross the border without the assistance and the permission of the coyotes first. Nobody cross the border if you try to. So and then from here on in, at the end of the piece, because we spent like, I think it was a couple of days with Yon. There are some people in the film that we spent just a couple of hours with. I mean, there's a young couple, Dominic Bracco, who was a photographer, and his fiance Megan Dhaliwal was also a freelance photographer. We spent a couple of hours with them in their apartment. I mean, we never even went outside to watch them do their work. We took them to lunch after we spent some time in their apartment, but because we spent so little time with them, because they didn't have a lot of time, because they were moving around and doing their work and moving out of the city and so forth, to go to work on assignments. We were lucky enough to spend a couple of days with Yon, and so all of these things, his status as one of the premier reporters there, his term, 15 years in Mexico, working as a freelance correspondent, and the time we were able to spend with him. These all determine how and where we use them in the film. So he opens the film. He really contributes a great deal of information to the film in the middle, and then is at the end of the film, which I think has a really, really powerful ending. He takes us out of the film. He ends the film with us, and he's accompanied by what we think is some really, really wonderful music done by a guy local here in Washington D.C. area, who did some wonderful work for us for a very, very reasonable price. Tyler Wilkins is just a great artist, and we found him in the nick of time, who walked us through the end of the piece with, he built the sound body, which is a whole different subject. He built the sound body, the story, the sound story of the film from beginning to end. I mean, you can watch, you could watch a black screen, an empty screen, listen to his music, and you'd have a sense of what's happening. Is this dangerous? Is this the dangerous part? Is this the mellow part? Is this the sad part? Is this the happy part of the film? Because of the music that he wrote. It was just an extraordinary contribution to the film, and something that all of you should really thinking about when you really get down to making professional versions of your videos.
Yeah, I saw Bill, the comment from Andres Boza. I don't know where he's logged in from, but he made the comment of how creepy things are and just kind of conveying the atmosphere. And I think the sound has a lot to do with that. We've only got a few more minutes left, so what I wanted to make sure we were able to do is to see this sort of last clip that you wanted to show. It gets kind of towards the end of the film. So what we're going to look at right now is the last clip that we're going to share with the audience. And we'll give you a few minutes right when we're done watching this clip to kind of talk about that, and then give some final words of encouragement as we go into Module 5 of the course. So here we are, and skip ahead to.
By the way, this scene in the car that just came up,
Yeah.
when the music comes back,
I don't know,
I shot that with the iPhone, not this piece here, but the end of the previous clip.
Okay, where it's just from with the music playing and.
Yeah, when I was in the back seat shooting through the windshield, and Yon and Milton's driving.
Okay, so we're gonna start right here at about 44 minutes.
The film runs to 54 minutes and change, so you'll have about 10 minutes if you start there.
All right, let's start a little bit. Let's go to right about here.
There's an interview with Yon before we go back to the border.
So we'll start with the car just because we're kind of running out of time. And
okay.
Violence, failing healthcare, powerful cartels, corruption, all signs of a crippled, dysfunctional state.
Where we're going right now is east. We're following a local police vehicle there. Milton called some contacts in the local police, saying we're interested in going out there, and can they come with us? It's a security precaution because it's a rough area, as Milton says. It's
territorio Apache, which is a phrase they use in Spanish to talk about tough areas. Such a beautiful place, and sadly, such a potentially violent place. There's the U.S. border fence atop a hillside. It looks like a giant spinal column of rusted steel separating the two countries. This is a flood zone during rainy season. The border is actually railroad tracks and barbed wire, as opposed to a solid wall or fence that would hinder the flow of water and debris across the landscape. So I was just talking to Comandante Mendoza, and he was describing how this area is normally patrolled by the military and the federal police, not the city police. This is normally the military and federal police patrolling this area, looking after this area, because, you know, this is their jurisdiction, because they can, if they do run into stuff, it can often be quite heavily armed guys. You can see these kind of things are pretty attractive to smugglers, these kind of places. I mean, that's the United States right there.
Yeah.
And there's Mexico right here. Now that looks pretty easy to jump. I mean, we could very easily go to the United States. Thousands of undocumented migrants cross this border each year. They flee poverty and drug gangs in their own countries. Most bring only clothes on their back and hope in their heart for a new life in the United States. We've been here a little over 24 hours.
Yeah.
And in that time frame, you have gone out at night to look at the fence, to look around Nogales. You have interviewed the mayor of this city. We have come out here to the countryside. We've done a couple of other things, you know, running around and working, you know, pretty much 24 hours a day. Do you think that people understand what real journalists do? What's your perception of what they perceive? What I want them to understand from this particular, I'm thinking about the story itself. So, I mean, like, all of these stories are complicated, and I want to show different sides. So this is not just simple. I mean, there is an issue with, you know, the United States border with undocumented workers, with cartels, with smugglers. These are real issues. But what I want to try and get across a lot of this is the real human stories. So when you go to these shelters and you see people who are human beings, who have had tough lives and lived tough lives, you know, and you imagine what they go through. And there's people just coming out of incarceration, being deported and trying to send money back to their family to feed their children. These are the human stories that whatever you feel about these issues, and they're real issues with undocumented workers in the workforce, with wages, with trade unions, with social services, with hospitals. These are real issues for people. But people need to feel the humanity of these stories, you know, the humanity of these people in this. Now I try and do these things from my heart and do good work. Regardless of how we feel about the legality or the humanity of it all, this long steel line separates more than just two nations. It separates husbands from wives, children from parents, brothers from sisters. As young Grillo and I walk along this frontier, I wonder if it's not these freelancers who help send us the truth about Mexico and the rest of the world, then who?
All right, I'm going to stop right there. And we didn't get a chance to sort of see, you know, one other aspect of the film that we didn't get a chance was kind of that interaction between Dominic that you kind of touched on at the end there. Yeah. But we got a few minutes left, Bill. But just first of all, I want to thank you for showing us a preview of this film, and then maybe kind of just give us a brief little explanation as to the end, and then kind of maybe some encouragement for everybody that's going into Module 5. And one thing I'd like to know is, you know, how long did this whole process take for this particular film?
This film, you know, the genesis of this film is actually my own career, which started in 1977. But you know, the work on the film itself really began, I guess, a couple of years ago, as part of what I do at American University. I created a course called Foreign Correspondence, and I teach people, you know, I teach my students how to become freelance foreign correspondents. And you know, along the way, I've been teaching it for a number of years. I've been at American University for you know, for quite a while, and along the way of teaching this craft, you know, it occurs to me that, you know, we've got to address this issue of these freelance foreign correspondents not being supported enough, not being paid enough. When they get into trouble, they're not, you know, backed enough, and we've seen some of the terrible results of these young folks going into conflict areas, who get kidnapped, who get murdered on the internet. And you know, one of my greatest concerns and fears is that something happened to more of these young people who are going out there to help us understand what's happening in the world, but who, because of lack of preparation, get into trouble. You know, and that's one of my greatest concerns and fears. So to kind of combat or to counter the possibility of that happening, it occurred to me that what we really need, you know, there's a movement now of organizations that have kind of emerged in the past several years, dedicated to helping freelancers, supporting freelancers working overseas. But no one is making films of these folks, and I think one of the missing ingredients is, you know, are films that show what journalists really do, particularly in the times that we live in now. And I don't want to politicize this at all, but we live at a time when some of our leaders are using these terms, fake news and enemy of the people, to describe and define people like me and my colleagues. And this kind of has, you know, tremendous ripple effect, not just in this country, but it goes beyond the country's borders. You know, you hear these autocrats and these dictators using those same terms to eliminate internal dissent and their own critics at home. So you know, it's shocking how little, and there's no reason why we would, but it's shocking how a few of us understand what real journalists really do, especially overseas. I mean, there are a couple of movies coming out now, as a matter of fact, about what real journalists really do. But you know, they're Hollywood movies. It doesn't show what the real persons are doing on a day-to-day basis. So that's where I see me, American University, my colleagues, and some of my students supporting that movement of organizations and people trying to support these freelance foreign correspondents. In terms of the film itself, I think, you know, that ending, you know, we start at the border, we return to the border, and we've got all this other stuff happening between those three pieces. You know, the beginning with Yon, the middle with Yon, and the end with Yon. I think Yon provides a perfect summary during our sit-down interview outside of that cafe in Nogales. He sums up the whole thing very, very well. And as I say, you know, we spent more time with Yon than we spent with any of the other characters. So his contribution to the film was really key. And that's it. I mean, I'm here to field any questions that the folks watching may have. I hope you've learned something out of this. And in terms of what you're doing, you know, I know this course is different because it doesn't involve you just sitting there and watching people talk for 5 or 6 modules. You know, it involves you going out and actually you know, generating this raw material to make stories with. And I got to tell you, I know it's tough. I know you've got other things to do, and I understand that we all live lives of everybody's in a rush and there's no extra time. But this filmmaking process has been one of the most gratifying components of my life. I mean, I've been doing this for a long time. I'm a specialist in visual communication, visual journalism, and I feel that this is the way. At least I certainly decided this is the way that I can influence people's lives, change their lives, by telling stories about how other people around the world live. And I would encourage you to give yourself a chance and work the craft. If you don't like it after really giving it an honest go, that's fine. Maybe you'll choose some other craft or some other component of this craft. But it's an ennobling endeavor, and one that will never it'll never deceive you. It'll never let you down.
Yeah, I think, Bill, one of the exciting things about this course and kind of what you touched on in the film is this idea that it's, freelance journalism anymore. You don't need, years and years ago, you needed, really technical, really expensive equipment and mics and these sorts of things. And what you the theme that I've kind of gotten out of this course is that you can do a lot of these things with some very simple tools. And the importance of the story, the importance of actually, in some cases going to some of these places that are maybe even dangerous. But I think that's what's powerful, and those are the sorts of things that really do make a difference. And what's exciting is that anymore it doesn't need to be quote unquote somebody that's been that works for the New York Times or that works for CNN. As you saw in the film, you've got these freelancers going around the world that are actually doing this, and probably living very cheaply just to sort of get the story, to get the shot, and to get the truth out there. And I think that's an exciting thing. So we got one more minute for you to kind of say your piece, and then we're gonna let people go. And then of course everyone can find Bill in our Facebook group. Also, of course, on journalismcourses.org. We've got the forums in there. You've got even an area where you can actually specifically ask questions to Bill. But just a few minutes, Bill. We're already a little bit over, just to sort of kind of wrap this all up. So you're on.
Yeah, I think that thanks, Ryan, for pointing out those points you just made. I think you're right on all of them. And I think when the history of these new forms of communication, this visual form of communication, here's a little story, and I'll keep it short, okay? It was way back in the end of the 1990s. I was on assignment for National Geographic Television, and I was documenting a photographer, a geographic photographer, and a writer who were doing a long journey in the African nation of Chad, okay? And we were in the Sahara Desert for like 6 weeks, running around with these folks. And there was one occasion where the photographer was making pictures of these cave drawings. They weren't really caves per se. They were kind of like these indentations in these mountains where people thousands of years ago had drawn these pictures of animals and people and vegetation that no longer is there. I mean, it's desert now, right? There were no big animals running around, like there were a couple thousand years ago. And of course, the people are different, and the vegetation is different. But it occurred to me while I was watching this photographer making pictures of those cave drawings, those cave paintings, and he was using a film camera, and I was using a digital video camera, and what I was watching was someone else document what for me are our ancestors of this craft. There's something inside us, human beings, that urge us to make a statement about who we are, where we are, what we're doing. There's something that leads us to wanting to document ourselves, our lives, our times. Perhaps it's a way of increasing our mortality. Perhaps it's a way of making a statement. Perhaps it's a way of leaving tracks. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but I am basically, and we are, I think, the offspring of the people who made those drawings on those rock indentations, those cave drawings thousands of years ago. Because the persons who did that, the men or the women who made those paintings, wanted to leave a mark. And that's what we do with the work that we do. We want to leave a mark. We want to tell people this is what our lives were about. You can do that now. You can do that with the machines that we're using right now. Everything is digitized. We can do that. But one of the key factors is, look, everybody has a cell phone right now. Everybody can make their videos. And if you look on YouTube, there's a lot of trash on YouTube, right? What's missing is the understanding and the knowledge of how to speak and understand the visual storytelling language. This is the key. The visual storytelling language. It's just another language like French, like Spanish, like Russian, like Chinese. It's another language that has its own alphabet. That is what I teach, the visual storytelling language. And to really get your message out, leave your mark, leave your drawings on the cave, if you will, you got to learn that language. You got to learn the visual storytelling language. That's the basics.
Well, thanks, Bill, and thanks to everybody that tuned in. And of course, this will be available for those of you who didn't tune in live. So that's it for this Hangout with Bill Gentile. And remember, stay up to date on all the courses with the Knight Center for Journalism in the Americas. Our course page is journalismcourses.org. See you in the forums.